Yeah. So I know we tailored it to DDoS here, but in general, I just like to say the phrase, never let a good incident go to waste, be that DDoS or otherwise. Um, so for me, I think it's an ongoing thing that I'm doing all the time. So it isn't one specific thing. So for me as a subject matter expert, kind of hands-on operational person, honestly, it's about doing your job day in, day out. So it's, looking at your DDoS mitigation processes and technologies. And then, like most of us operators anyway, we're generally always assessing our capacity, our performance, tuning our devices, looking at new threats out there, working with folks like yourself and other people on the panel and the kind of global community, I'll call it, to kind of look at some of these new threats. So I'm always doing that as an ongoing basis and kind of coming up with my crazy great ideas or, some new feature that we want to implement from our provider. And I also, I'm good with rejection, I guess, because a lot of these times I'll bring some of these ideas to our leadership, and for some very good reasons, sometimes because of budget or other priorities, those get turned down. But I don't get dissuaded about it. I just kind of continue, maybe upgrading that document or, where opportunities present when incidents come up, kind of raising that again, going like, and not under a I told you so kind of vein, but just, I think that there's good ideas and then there's good ideas at the right time. And even though that right time might be a bit too late for me, it's still a right time. So I just don't lose faith if the idea I'm proposing is good. So I'm always ready and prepared to bring that idea up over and over. An example of that is I previously mentioned that, one of the worst impact attacks that I've had to deal with was, the 72-hour event of this person on Twitter, changing their attack and taunting us. And the end solution in that, after a good 72 hours, was we had to install we already had a DDoS mitigation appliance, but we didn't have it in line. And the solution there was to put that appliance in line in the middle of our network, which as a large operator serving over 1 million end users was, no daunting task, no mean feat, even though because we had looked at this, for I think it was a good year and a half, myself and some of my team members identified, hey, this would be an improvement. We had brought it to our leadership a couple of times. And again, for very valid, good reasons, it was deferred or delayed, or the budget was deferred till another fiscal year. But because we had that documentation ready to go and we had all of our, we had previously socialized this idea on a few occasions, in the midst of this weekend 72-hour kind of crisis incident, it was relatively easy to kind of, have this prepared documentation to say, hey, this is our solution. We've talked about this a bit before. Yes, there is risk involved. However, we have socialized this, and we were able to, from start of incident to end, being about 72 hours, which was lengthy, do a very complicated, network change. On very, very short notice, and it was successful in the end. So, that's just another example that, even though I'd been turned down or our team had been turned down a couple of times on putting that, what we believe was a good solution in place, we just, bided our time and waited and resisted the urge to say, I told you so. And just when, that opportunity presented itself, we were able to not just mitigate that incident, but most likely, proactively mitigate future incidents, because now we had a more robust DDoS mitigation service in place.
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to this answer. On the defensive side, it's important to have a postmortem process to learn from outages and also near misses. So some questions that I think everyone should ask themselves after any DOS attack, even if it didn't cause impact, is one is, how was the event resolved, right? What if sometimes people say, oh, the attack, we resolved it in 5 minutes. Well, actually, the attacker lost interest in 5 minutes. It had nothing to do with you solving the problem. If the attacker had continued, maybe you would have been down for hours or days, right? So did you resolve it on your own time scale, and are you confident that you can do that? The other thing I always ask is, what would have happened if the attack was twice as large or 4 times as large or more, right? So don't just worry about the current attack, but think of what the next phase of that escalation could be. I often see in industry, the largest attacks, they don't increase gradually over time. It sort of comes in spurts. And so I've actually seen attacks that were 4 times larger than anything the world had ever seen before. So you always sort of have to be prepared for that larger jump. But there's also a second side of this answer, which is there's an offensive role that you can play to push back on the attackers. So, when you get attacked by attacker infrastructure, try to identify that infrastructure, and you could also disrupt it, right? So that could be notifying owners of compromised machines, or taking down a botnet C2, or even referring a case to law enforcement. There are a lot of different ways that you can push back and sort of make it harder for attackers to maintain their large infrastructure. And maybe there will still be attacks, but they'll be smaller as a result.
I think we could do a lot better at looking at the devices which people roll out on their networks and seeing whether or not they have they're capable of being used in denial of service attacks because they amplify traffic. It is now the case that when the IETF works on the protocol, they think through very carefully as to whether or not, if you send this sequence of packets, could you cause an amplification, right? So we're getting a lot better than we used to be in the past at designing the protocols so that it's hard to use them for high levels of amplification. But the people who build the equipment which we put on our networks are not being that careful, and that causes a lot of the problems. And certainly we continually see ISPs who have a particular ADSL modem, cable modem, whatever the device whatever the technology may be, and it has a vulnerability. It can be used, it can be taken over by and put into a botnet. You can reflect traffic off it and so forth. And I think there's a responsibility on people providing service and putting lots of identical devices onto their networks to check them beforehand that they don't seem to have any of the well-known problems, and secondly, make very sure that the manufacturer is going to be really responsive and really quick at getting them a patch, and they then have the mechanisms to roll out that patch across their fleet so that they can actually mitigate problems really quickly.
Look, I mean, it's not easy to do changes in the middle of the crisis. The best time is actually yesterday.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, once dust settles, then so I mean, I'm not a if an organization is kind of in the middle of the crisis, so it all depends on obviously how well prepared they are and stuff, and then they usually, like, organization would reach to their upstream providers, and like if you are a victim, kind of reach out to existing service providers and just ask for help and advice, and I'm sure people will be more than happy to jump in and assist, even if you don't have an existing DDoS protection services. And but ultimately, it's after such event, it's important to work out the plan. And so look at your infrastructure again, make sure that is robust and resistant to this style of attack. Hey, look at your incident response. Hey, how do you have an incident response plan? Do you have a list of your service providers or vendors? If you do have DDoS service providers or vendors, do you have their contacts that you can reach out 24/7 for a specific platform? Do you have a list of your internal staff who's responsible for a customer communications, internal communications, legal, all of that stuff? I've on the back of attacks on New Zealand a couple of years ago, I actually put together a template for the DDoS incident response. And it's out there on a GitHub for everyone to use. So just hey, take it as a template and then fill with your information, and that takes you through. Hey, do you do you have that? Do you have that? Do you have those basic contact details? Do you have do you know your service providers and their capabilities? Because yeah, you might actually your existing sort of platform or service provider that you use, it's already has that capability. You're just not utilizing it. So
Right.
and also, yeah, in the event, hey, who do you need to reach out? Both, do you have those list of those internal people, internal resources who have to be part of the incident? Do you have the list of the external parties, and it can be customer stakeholders, government regulatory bodies, all of that, and have it in one document that's readily available and hopefully tested regularly.
I would say don't expect your next DDoS attack to be your previous DDoS attack. It's really fluid and dynamic field. And if you're preparing your network for DDoS attacks that you've seen, you're doing it wrong. Do your homework, do your research, or get a vendor that does this homework and research for you. And this is one of the things that we are trying to do with our radar project. We try to account all the possible threats in V4 and V6 address space. And when the threat goes public, when information on this amplifiable service goes public, we instantly provide public access to statistics of these services, amplifiable services, for every individual network. So think ahead, plan ahead, do research, do homework, prepare for something new every time.
Nice. That's a good piece of advice.
I've been in a position to take advantage of these crises many times in order to get things implemented that, because of organizational inertia and hesitation and things like that, we weren't able to get implemented before. And so things like situationally appropriate network access control policies, things like ensuring that network infrastructure self-protection best current practices are implemented, things like ensuring, especially when you're talking about like an endpoint network or an enterprise, that they have a decent DNS architecture and that they are resilient in that regard, and so forth. Things like that are things that you'll note in the midst of an attack, and work to get implemented, making sure that you're taking advantage of all the capabilities that you have. You know, something that a lot of folks seem to have forgotten about is that we have SRTBH and DRTBH, and we have FlowSpec that can be used by any kind of organization. It's not restricted just to to transit ISPs, right? It can be used by endpoint networks as well to help mitigate attacks on their edges. And so getting that stuff implemented so that at the very least you have that kind of capability. I've to get stuff like that implemented during the heat of battle. But the real key is to make sure that when you're working an incident, you really, if it's possible at all to do this, you need to have a scribe. You need to have a scribe who is sitting on the conference bridges, the collaboration system that you're all using together, that all the different stakeholders are using together to work the incident, to keep track of what is said and what is done. Because number one, that's very critical for the postmortem. I have participated in postmortem sometimes where just simply because of, you're in the heat of battle, a lot of people are making multiple changes and so forth, that key elements that should have been part of the postmortem were lost. They were forgotten about, or people misremembered. And so you need to have a good record of what was done. And that way it makes the postmortem much more useful, because you have a good, reliable record. So when you're evaluating what did you do well, and you need to reinforce and maybe do more of it, and what did you do poorly and you need to do a better job of next time, that you have all the facts in hand. And it's also very important as well that management are kept up to date during the incident. You don't want to, sometimes those of us who have an operational bent, we want to rush in, we want to stop the bad packets and get the good packets flowing again, and that's all we concentrate on. And it's good to, to be aggressive, because and understand that during a DDoS attack, seconds feel like minutes, minutes feel like hours, hours feel like days. Right? You have that time dilation effect for customers, for the operational folks, for the executives, you name it. But you have to also have constant communications with management. You need to ensure that management understand during the event, right, what are the major decision points that have to be made. And sometimes people are completely empowered to make the right decisions. Other times, depending on the situation, you may have to be able to get management approval to take a particular action during an attack. And so you need to make sure that those communications are kept flowing during the event. And that, because number one, it makes sure that all the management and executives understand what's going on and what the real impact is to the organization, to the customers. Number two, when it's time to have the postmortem and come back with a set of recommendations, it's not just viewed as some abstract wish list from a bunch of bit heads, because these folks lived through the incident with the people who are actually responsible for setting things right, and they understand the pressures and the tensions and the trade-offs that had to take place, and it makes it much more visceral and real for them. They understand that their revenue stream, their customer base, their brand reputation, all of these different things were, adversely affected potentially by this event, and it makes it much more comprehensible to them when new resources are requested, changes in processes and procedures are recommended. That again, it's not just a wish list, from people in an ivory tower, but it's actually the product of cold, hard experience and blood, toil, sweat, and tears during an incident.